So I'm delighted that 25 odd years later you can recall that cartoon so vividly. I'm going to pass that along to Mike, and I'm sure he'll be delighted to hear that. The second point that caller made is that our liberties are, even when abused, are our fundamental strength. And of course, I mean, of course I agree with that. That's absolutely the case. At the end of the day, boisterous, open, freewheeling, liberal, democratic societies contain deeper reserves of strength than closed, tyrannical and totalitarian ones do, and that accounts for the triumph of the West, or largely accounts for the triumph of the West over the Nazis and over the Soviets and the communist regime. And I'm confident that it's going to account for our ultimate triumph over the jihadi movements. That being said, it would also be, it seems to me, it's also absurd to suggest that we're simply an open society. We're also a society of laws, and we're a society of common sense limits. And at least insofar as common sense limits are involved, our contention on the editorial page is that the disclosure of the financial monitoring program was a non-commonsensical disclosure. It broke a story on a program of genuine value and real significance to our efforts against terrorism, and it's one that was where members of Congress were briefed. I don't think anyone has seriously alleged it's illegal, and as I said, even the New York Times urged that just such a program be created in the wake of September 11th. So yes, absolutely, we need a liberal, democratic, open, pluralist society with a vigorous and engaged press, but I don't think that should be a recipe or a prescription for a kind of First Amendment absolutism, just like there shouldn't be a prescription for any other kind of absolutism. So your caller from Kentucky, who said that she had seen President Bush and Vice President Cheney discussing the program on TV, I think she said that she saw it last week. Well, last week the program had been disclosed, and as I said, for several weeks it had been the policy of the government, since they felt the cat was out of the bag, to share that information with the press. As to her claims that military tribunals or military commissions have no place in American law or our experience, I'm sorry, but she's factually in error. George Washington used them during the Revolutionary War, Lincoln used them, and Franklin Roosevelt also used them to try and ultimately execute some Nazi saboteurs who had come ashore during the Second World War. So unless you think that Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, who most of us feel are our greatest presidents, were somehow operating outside the boundaries of American decency, I would suggest that caller is just mistaken. As to your caller from Philadelphia, who says that anything but the absolute truth is a lie, well, I mean, I don't know exactly how to answer that. I mean, I'm looking at my face in the monitor, and you can make the argument that my hair looks fabulous or that I'm disheveled, and that's what we call spin. So it's I think simply a nonsense to say that there's that spin, what we call spin, or putting the best face on any given circumstance is tantamount to mendacity or lying. That's just not reality.
Bret Stephens, foreign affairs columnist with the Wall Street Journal in New York, in our studios at Pace University. Let's do this one more time. Let's go to San Bernardino. You're on the air. George Bush supporter.
Thank you. I just have two quick points. One is, it's interesting how the news media sort of creates its own news by disclosing programs that the administration's trying to use to catch people, and then when they don't work, or because they've been disclosed, they'll be the first to criticize them. And the second point is, isn't it proof that because the New York Times had to hold the story a day in order to bring a Treasury official home? What is that all about? Thank you.
Let's go to Glasgow, Kentucky. You're on the air.
Hello.
Hi.
I have two questions. One question is, how is our Bill of Rights being protected? Another one is, are we not fighting hate? And isn't that an idea? And I'm just concerned about those two questions.
Thanks. One last one. We'll go back to Bret Stephens. Houston, Texas. You're on the air.
Hello.
You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. This is a happy day. I have Bret Stephens for my favorite newspaper that's right here at my feet, and I have Brian Lamb, and I get to talk with both of them. So thank you both. I've been waiting every single day. I turn right to the editorial page to see what the Wall Street Journal is going to have to say on this story, and I look forward to reading it and appreciate you being here. I changed from the New York Times to the Wall Street Journal in 1990 after 15 years of the New York Times, and I've never looked back. I guess my next two questions are much for Brian and sort of related to the topic. Well, first, to the Wall Street Journal. Brian, I look forward to the day when you have at least an hour with John Emshwiller, who has followed the Enron story from beginning through his outstanding interview with Jeff Skilling in the last week or two, and I'm sure you'll have him, and I can't wait for that. And then both of you, I'd like to know, how am I supposed to deal with this and accept that there is responsible newspapering at the local level? I sat in the living room of a neighbor who is an editor of our local paper, which, Brian, you know what that is because you have one of the columnists on frequently. He sat there. He told me that we live under tyranny. Now, this is a good guy. In neighborhood terms, this is a good guy. He's an editor of the editorial section of our international section of the newspaper. If this is he wasn't drinking. He is not a teenager. How can I in any way credit this point of view as something I should turn to? It influences what I read, most definitely at the local level, and why I go to national press. Of course.
Okay, I'll let it go at that. Thank you. Bret Stephens, again, number of items.
Well, let me first of all thank the lady from Houston for being a faithful reader of the Journal. Of course, we always appreciate that. Whether it's at someone else's expense or not is her call entirely. The comment she relays about a local editor saying that the United States lives under tyranny is, I think, becoming depressingly typical in some quarters, and it just sort of shows, to a certain extent, the debasement of language that has occurred in I guess, recent decades. You use a word like tyranny to describe the Bush administration. Well, what words do you have left to describe someone like Hosni Mubarak? I was just in Egypt for a couple weeks reporting on how he's treating his opposition there, the kind of torture, genuine torture, real torture that prisoners there have had to endure. The fact that liberal opposition leaders are put in jail on lengthy sentences after trials with kangaroo courts. And Mubarak is himself considered a relative moderate, at least in comparison to someone like Kim Jong-il of North Korea or Robert Mugabe. So people like that editor who say with a straight face and, as she says, in possession of their faculties, that we live under tyranny, I think express not only a kind of level of stupidity, but an amazing naivete about the world as it is outside of our borders. I've spent most of my life abroad, and anyone who does so quickly understands that even by European standards, we are a much, much more liberal, much freer, much more open society than, say, Great Britain is, which has an Official Secrets Act which sharply limits the rights of the press, or countries like Germany, which have much more restrictive laws about, say, abortion than the United States does. This editor, I think, probably hasn't traveled more than 20 miles outside of his hometown. I mean, that's the sort of level of parochialism that comment betrays. Now, this gets to the comment from the lady from Kentucky. Not quite sure what the sort of drift of her comments was, but you know, what's happening to the Bill of Rights? Well, it's being, as always, vigorously protected by an independent judiciary with judges appointed to, for the most part, to lifetime positions, appointed by Democrats, appointed by Republicans, some liberal, some conservative, and you know, the rights there seem to me to be generally fairly thoroughly enforced, and that's why, you know, I don't see how this country's press liberties have been curtailed, or any other kinds of liberties in the past 6 years, or at least during my relatively young lifetime. She said something about fighting a war against hate, and in some sense that's true, in the sense that we are dealing with enemies among jihadis whose purpose is fundamentally to destroy not just our way of life, but destroy us. And you can actually find fatwas, texts, which say that it would be legitimate in some Salafi textbooks to detonate a nuclear bomb in the United States to kill millions of Americans. So that is precisely the kind of hate that we're dealing with. And so, you know, I think to pretend that somehow the Bush administration is so utterly ogreish that it gives the Bin Ladens of the world a run for their money is just preposterous. I'm trying to remember the comments from the caller from I think California.
San Bernardino. It was all about whether or not the newspapers are creating their own news, like the New York Times creating its own news by this.
Yeah, I suppose that I suppose that happens, but I can't think of any recent no instance of it jumps to mind, so I'm going to just defer that question.
And the other question was, what is one of the fellows that called said, what's this all about that the the Treasury Department would call the Wall Street Journal, plant the story that the New York Times had already generated and was about ready to publish? Is that you know, we talked about this earlier. Is that normal around here?
Well, as I said, it's certainly normal in terms of my career in journalism that once or it's not out of the ordinary, once administration officials feel like there's going to be some kind of disclosure in one paper, they might choose to offer it to various sources. You know, for reasons that are maybe partly fair and partly a little bit sneaky.
Bret Stephens is our guest. He is at the Wall Street Journal. He's in New York this morning. We take a call from Jackson, Missouri. You're on the air.
Oh, thank you. First of all, let me say thank you so much, Brian, for C-SPAN and Washington Journal. And to the gentleman with you, I can't believe that you would think that Osama bin Laden, who has managed to evade us all this time, is so stupid that he would not know about these programs. And I would remind you, although I can't quote it exactly, of Ben Franklin's speech, the state saying that those who are willing to give up freedom for security deserve neither. I just can't believe that the Wall Street Journal has become so biased that they would not believe that the American people have a right to know what's going on. I knew about it. I think the 9/11 Commission, when I read it, that there was information in there about this program. It didn't name it, but there was information that we were tracking money. They track my son's money when it comes from Kuwait.
All right, thanks. West Lafayette, Indiana. George Bush supporter. You're on with Bret Stephens. What would you like to say?
Thank you to begin with for C-SPAN and your guest today. They keep talking about healing the wounds between the two parties. one of the things that I've only heard once